This is 100 Years of Cox. You are listening to a podcast by Francis Thompson. I am telling the story of 10 siblings from the Machel Cox family through the letters they wrote to each other. They were born in England between 1868 and 1884. 7 of them lived in England and 3 lived abroad in the colonies. These siblings are my family. Sibling number 2, Edmund, is my great-grandfather. In this episode, it is October 1907, and Bernard describes the landing of Dirigible Number 1 at Crystal Palace, which was an airship filled with hydrogen and constructed from Goldbeater's skin. Cuthbert tells some school stories to amuse his siblings and also has many teeth pulled out by the dentist. Arthur ruins some valuable camera equipment by being drenched by waves whilst on an expedition. Vera and Bernard visit Garfield House and play with Christopher's train set, and the popular craze of Diabolo is mentioned in the budget. Bernard's letter. Sydenham, 10th of October 1907. Dear family, I received this noble budget 10 weeks after I sent it off. The time before, it only took 7 weeks coming round. I think between 6 and 7 weeks is about the average time. I see Edmund and Dorothy are the culprits. I have suggested a penalty for future offenders. See Avice's letter. Several contributors have recently given their own opinions on the budget. Avice describes it as perfectly delightful. Enid says our letters are truly splendid. Arthur says the budget is colossal. And Edmund says the budget is immense. I was very interested in Neville's cycling tour letter. His views on the family in general are amusing and fairly correct. He is now very busy packing, as his luggage goes off tomorrow morning directly to his ship. He will only take a small amount of luggage with him across Europe, which is really very practical. He is going to do Europe on his way to Naples, where he joins the boat for Africa. Cuthbert, what club do you belong to at Berkhamsted, where you can play billiards? It sounds a grand idea. Next time you come home, if you ever do again, I think you ought to walk all the way here, and we will have the tent put up for you on the lawn. We will get Lord Roberts to come and make you a presentation, and you will be able to fancy yourself at Aldershot. Edmund, your photos are very interesting. I especially like the 2 groups at Studland, and Father, Mother and the aunts on the beach. I hope to have a try at your quotation competition, but I think it will be rather difficult. Avice, your illustration of the event at Hereford is delightful. I was there, though I left directly afterwards. You say, vote for what is to happen to Edmund. Someone has stuck in and Dorothy, but in printed characters, evidently frightened that their handwriting might be recognised. Enid, the 2 days' post from Liverpool to Sydenham was quite correct, as the 20th of July was a Saturday and there is no Sunday delivery here. I wonder if anyone else sees the likeness to Aldwyn in Owen's photo. I think they are most alike. Moustache is the spelling favoured by Webster's dictionary. Under moustache, it simply says, see, moustache. I didn't know this, however, when I wrote it. I didn't realise there were 2 possible spellings. I suppose you all know the riddle. Eliza had a little one. Louisa had a big one. Men and boys never have it. Girls have it once and once only, and women never have it. Except poor Mrs. Pillington of the Clapham Road, and she had 2 in the same place. This is nothing to do with a moustache, by the way. Aldwyn, I always read my letters through, and generally several times, as I keep forgetting what I have been writing about. I hope you will like the photo of yourself taking a class of natives in the wilds of Africa that I enclosed. The queer look about your feet was, I am afraid, prophetic, as I had no idea at the time that typhoid fever had left you groggy in the trilbies. By the way, who are the 5 members of the budget who have had military training of a sort? Cuthbert, Aldwin and I were in the Berkhamsted Corps, and Neville, of course, was in the CVMSC, or something like it. Who is the 5th? You must feel like a poultry farm, I should think, after drinking concentrated chickens 2 or 3 times a day. I see that you are now officially in Nyasaland. I think British Central Africa, though clumsy, is a more imposing name. October 13th. Don't be inquisitive and try and read what I have just scratched out. I thought Studland a delightful place, though I expect it will be more spoilt every year by trippers from Swanage and Bournemouth. I am very anxious to see the photo of the duel that I took. It was the first duel that I've ever been present at. I felt just like a Daily Mirror photographer, and should have revelled in getting a picture of Neville's corpse, if only my principal had been a better shot. I much enjoyed the expedition to Warbarrow Bay, where Mother womanfully climbed a young mountain. I was also fortunate in being able to get in 4 days of the cycling tour, which was a tremendous success. Neville was invaluable. Generally he was up an hour before breakfast, cleaning the machines, pumping up tyres, etc. Edmund lent an air of respectability to the party, and his masterful voice was very useful at times. Avice and Vera behaved as perfect little ladies, though they didn't always look it. Cuthbert was angelic, as usual. We had very few arguments, and I think I am right in saying there were no quarrels. In fact, we were a very harmonious party, and ladies always add to the charm of any expedition. Anyhow, ladies like the lady members of the budget. Very nicely expressed, thank you, adds Avice. We sadly missed Enid and Arthur. However, I wonder how we should have managed with a party of 8 in getting rooms. 6 was rather a large number at times to be provided for suddenly. We played a sort of up Jenkins game on our train journeys, which at times proved very uproarious. The chief event lately has been the arrival of the airship Nulli Secundus, or Dirigible No. 1. I saw it first hovering round the north tower of the Crystal Palace. They had some sort of siren on board, which sounded most weird. It performed several revolutions before descending in the grounds. It was a remarkable sight, and it looked perfectly under control. The next morning we all went up to see it. Father, Mother, Neville, Vera and I. Even the servants have been to see it. An airship is a great curiosity, and large crowds have gathered. We got within 20 yards of it and had a good look. I expect you have all seen pictures of it by now in the newspapers. The cigar-shaped balloon was about 80 to 100 feet long and made of very small squares of Goldbeater skin. This was covered with a very fine net, which ended off in ropes, to which a light steel or aluminium framework was attached. At the bottom of the framework was a long boat-shaped car, very narrow, which contained the motor engine right in front. There was a propeller or screw on each side of the car. The rudder was a large piece of canvas stretched on a frame, and there were other horizontal canvas frames immediately below the balloon part, stretching out like wings on both sides. At the stern, which I believe was to prevent the ship from rolling, there were 2 or 3 sort of box kites in front of the balloon to prevent dipping. Though the balloon was fully inflated and there was a fresh breeze, it was quite motionless when we saw it. It was held down by 3 or 4 ropes on each side. I am not surprised that it became uncontrollable in the gale a few days later, as it was in quite an exposed position, no shelter at all. I expect we shall see them developing an improved one very shortly. Neville, Vera and I have been very busy practising Diabolo and are getting on slowly. I went to see the French performance at Earl's Court yesterday. It was very wonderful what they managed to do, and it certainly is a most graceful game to watch. Cuthbert came yesterday and has just departed again, so he has been home after all. He is very fit, though he lost 8 teeth last week, not at football, and he expects to lose 8 more. However, I will leave it to him to expatiate on the subject in his own letter. Neville, Vera, Cuthbert and I went to see The Merry Widow a week ago. It wasn't at all bad for a musical comedy, and there is a most haunting waltz refrain in it. We, not Cuthbert, have also been to see The Earl of Pawtucket, which is very amusing, though absurd, and Captain Brassbound's Conversion, which is delightful. Ellen Terry was just perfect, and though we were in the second row of the stalls, we couldn't see that she was made up. If any of you have a chance of seeing her in it, don't let it slip. I read A Woman Alone in the Heart of Japan by G.A. Fisher, who is an American lady teacher, a spinster. It is a bright, chatty account of Japan and the people, with numerous photographs. Very easy to read, and I should have no hesitation in recommending it if she hadn't thought it necessary to visit everything and everybody. There was no sight, however disgusting, that she didn't go to see, and no class of people, whatever their mode of life, that she didn't interview and photograph as well. She insisted on seeing an operation at the hospital, and she travelled miles in discomfort to see hot springs where she could see the most painful diseases and watch and photograph the sufferers undergoing agonizing cures, and all out of curiosity. I can't think why some women are so proud of going to see places and people that most decent people would do all they could to avoid, or else keep it to themselves if they did go. Farewell for 6 or 7 weeks. Yours affectionately, Bernard. P.S. Wilfred's letter, dated 27th of August, is very amusing. I have read The Last Ride Together and Rabbi Ben Ezra, and I quite agree that Browning is a poet. But surely a great lot of his poetry is prose. I suppose Wordsworth, Coleridge and Tennyson wrote tons of twaddle between them. But don't Browning's works contain a greater proportion of prose than most poets? Please contradict me, somebody. There is too much intellect in Browning and not enough beauty. Beautiful ideas want clothing in beautiful forms to constitute poetry, in my opinion. Notes on Bernard's letter. He also included 13 other book reviews. Bernard was frequently congratulated on his budget literary supplement, but Bernard's review of A Woman Alone in the Heart of Japan appealed to me because of his horrified opinion of the author. If you don't know what Diabolo is, you can look it up online. The siblings discuss it at length in the coming letters, as the game was hugely popular, but some people couldn't stand it, and the game became very divisive. Bernard even buys a ticket and goes to Earl's Court to watch a professional performance. You may never have heard this riddle. Eliza had a little one. Louisa had a big one. Men and boys never have it. Girls have it once and once only, and women never have it, except poor Mrs. Pillington of the Clapham Road, and she had 2 in the same place. Well, I've never heard it before. I think the answer is the letter L. If you have a look on maps, you will see the Longton Avenue, which is next door to Wells Park in Sydenham, is just a short walk from Crystal Palace. The Crystal Palace itself was a huge structure, which was originally built in Hyde Park in 1851 for the Great Exhibition. It was then moved to some empty ground in Penge, on the outskirts of London, on a hill looking down over London. Sydenham became a wealthy suburb, and many large villas were built, although in 1907 it was still just a village on the outskirts of London. In 1907, Sydenham was still part of Kent, which is why Vera plays hockey for Kent. The huge structure was used for decades for shows, exhibitions and special events. And in 1909 there are several budget accounts describing the first ever gathering of Lord Baden-Powell's newly formed Boy Scouts at Crystal Palace. 11,000 scouts were there on that day, and the siblings write about it, describing Lord Baden-Powell as, characteristically, rather full of himself. In 1907, as well as the huge palace, there were a lot of gardens and open space, which is why early airships landed in the grounds. If you look online, you can see photos of Nully Secundus, or Dirigible No. 1, which was owned by the British Army. In another letter, Neville remembers when they saw their very first airship, saying it was hovering over Sydenham, hooting in a peculiar fashion, and they were all very alarmed. The general public were clearly very interested in airships. Zeppelins were rigid airships filled with hydrogen. They were constructed with Goldbeater skin, which consisted of treated animal intestines. Sorry if you're a veggie. These intestines were traditionally used to sandwich a sheet of gold in order to beat it down to create gold leaf, hence the peculiar name. During the golden age of airships, butchers in Germany were required to carefully remove and treat all intestines, so important were they in the construction of airships. It's quite incomprehensible to us today. If you know your history, you'll be aware that the 1937 Hindenburg disaster signalled the end of hydrogen-filled Zeppelins. To us today, it's a complete wonder that an airship filled with hydrogen was ever considered safe. Remember, none of the siblings have seen an aeroplane yet. There are first-hand accounts in 1909 budgets of the very first planes seen overhead, and the siblings are very excited to see these historical events. A couple of the brothers also went to one of the very first air shows to be held in England, in Blackpool in 1909. There is an article on ediblegeography.com which is called The Lost Sausages of World War I, with the calculation that each German airship represented up to 33 million potential sausage casings. In World War I, no Germans ate sausages at all. Cuthbert's letter. Number 2, Chapel Street, Berkhamsted, 21st of October 1907. Dear Budget, to my mind this has been the best budget we have had since the first. Avice's illustrations and Bernard's literary supplement are features that must not be allowed to drop. I am getting a little suspicious of the competitions, with so many limerickers about. I propose that anyone guilty of suggesting a limerick competition be at once expelled. One of the masters here has disgraced himself by winning 10 shillings and sixpence from Ali Sloper for a limerick. I suppose I need hardly point out the inaccuracies of Arthur's account of the rowing of Avice and myself at Studland. As a matter of fact, what with halfpenny buns and the motion of the waves, I do not believe Arthur was in a fit state to know what was going on. Enid, I am so glad to hear that you are safely back again at Liverpool. Owen's court fees are practically identical to ours, though I fancy our boys pay 5 shillings more for uniform, which covers everything all the time you are in the corps, i.e. a new uniform if you grow out of the old one. I can add nothing new about our grand bicycle tour. It was an enormous success and must be repeated. Tintern surpassed all expectations. After leaving the party, I had a splendid week near Oxford with Thomas, an old college friend. They have a charming old manor house and grounds. I spent a lot of time with Thomas and his sister going to see horses, as they were both trying to find a new hunter for the season. I always got left to talk to the dealer while they discussed the horse or tried its paces. I got quite good at concealing my ignorance, and by the end of the week I used to hazard a few critical remarks, which were not always received with favour. During the week I punctured twice, and I broke my chain again. Berkhamsted is as full as ever, and I've got some very nice new boys. My own form is beautifully small, only 16, so I'm really getting a good deal more into them, I think. There is an astonishingly big sixth form, but it was inevitable, as so few have left. During the holidays, Mr. Bavin, the music master, had an operation for appendicitis, and though he has made a marvellous recovery, he is not allowed to play the organ yet. We are having to depend on one of the boys for all services. He has really done awfully well, and of course it is a great chance for him, as he is going in for an organ scholarship at Keyes College. I must tell you a good story, though some of you have heard it already. On Sundays there is always a roll call in the big hall before chapel. The first day this term, Dr. Fry was settling new boys into their places. In doing so, he pointed with his left hand to a small junior to show him where to sit. The small boy promptly stepped forward and, to the great surprise of everybody present, shook the headmaster's hand warmly. It has been suggested by a wit that, being Scotch, the small boy misunderstood Fry's inquiry as to his name, "Who are you?" for a friendly greeting in his native tongue, thinking he was saying, "How are you?" Arthur, you will be interested to hear that Pawsey is in the fourth form senior now, and I take him for Latin and history. He is not at all bad, and I think he will easily get a naval clerkship, which seems to be the idea at present. It is always interesting when we take on a Garfield House boy. Both you and I are always especially interested to see how he turns out. I am sure you are all longing to know about my visits to the dentist, Aldwyn especially, as he has suffered similar misfortunes. I had 8 out with Gaths tomorrow, fortnight ago, and I'm going to have 9 more out tomorrow. It was not nearly as bad as I expected, although I felt fearfully giddy and sick afterwards. However, I am not looking forward to tomorrow, as, alas, it means feeding on slops for some time. In the wet weather, we have been playing billiards at the club. It is a working men's club, to which we pay a trifle subscription, and we have a key of our own, as it does not open for them until the evenings. It has been a great boon. We have been playing an American tournament among the masters. It is now at a very exciting stage, and I think I ought to win. My evenings are pretty full this term. CSU once every 3 weeks, Browning Society once a fortnight, Church Choral Society, where we are doing Hiawatha by Coleridge Taylor every Tuesday, School Glee Club, where we are doing Bridges' Flag of England every Friday. By the way, Bernard, I think your criticism of Browning not altogether unfair, but it is a good deal altered since your outburst that attracted remarks from both Wilfred and myself. I enclose a few camp photos. Please leave them in the budget till they come round to me again. I have been reading Fitchett's Story of the Indian Mutiny. I recommend it to you as one of the best books I have read to give to boys to read. I have also read a splendid history of Nicholson, as well as 41 Years in India by Lord Roberts. Your loving brother, Cuthbert. Notes on Cuthbert's letter. The Song of Hiawatha is an 1855 poem written by Henry Longfellow. The composer, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, set it to music at the turn of the century, and in the early decades of the 20th century there were thousands of performances. It was a popular choice for church choirs and choral societies like the one Cuthbert sang with. Cuthbert apparently had a lovely baritone voice. The composer Coleridge Taylor was known to some as the Black Marler or the Black Dvorak. Hiawatha was greatly admired by the leading musicians, composers and conductors of the day, including Sir Charles Villiers Stanford, Sir Hubert Parry and Sir Arthur Sullivan, who was one half of the Gilbert and Sullivan partnership, although Coleridge Taylor also had to deal with racism. For decades, Hiawatha was as famous as Handel's Messiah and Mendelssohn's Elijah, and yet today it is not often performed, and few have heard of it. Interestingly, the African-American spiritual, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, was included in the overture of Hiawatha by Coleridge Taylor. He was descended from African slaves, although he never visited Africa and died young in England. Poor Cuthbert and his teeth. 17 teeth is a lot of teeth to lose. Aldwin was very interested, as he also lost many teeth, and he had dentures like Cuthbert did. Aldwin tells of young boys in African villages who were enthusiastically curious about his false teeth. Limericks, well, they were very fashionable in the early 1900s, but Cuthbert is clearly not impressed with them. Ali Sloper's Half Holiday was a magazine, and it cost 1 penny when it was first published in 1884. It was described as the highest-selling magazine in the world, and is believed to be the first time a comic strip character recurred regularly in a magazine. The character was called Ali Sloper, and he was a lazy schemer who was often found sloping through alleys to avoid his landlord and other creditors. Some of the siblings are currently busy writing entertaining limericks based on each other, and these will appear in the 1907 Christmas budget. Cuthbert won't be happy. Arthur's Letter, Garfield House, 27th of October 1907. Dear Budget, I seem to have expended so much of my spare time on reviews lately that it is a relief to turn to something that does not pay. It is very dull to do nothing but shoot for the pot. Avice, this is a metaphor from big game hunting, not from pot hunting, and if you don't know the difference, I can't tell you. Ask Vera. I quite agree that the present budget is considerably above the average, and I have greatly enjoyed reading all your contributions. And now for a word about that spouse of mine. Some of you either did not trust me to belabour her sufficiently, or did not take in the gist of her apology in her last letter, wherein she stated, or intended to state, that she was withdrawing from the budget altogether. This space is left for an illustration of this painful incident from Avice or anyone else. It is all the space I can spare. I like that bicycling tour episode very much, and I think illustrations in the budget are to be encouraged. Wilfrid, I try as far as possible to be young and light-hearted when I come to the budget, and on those grounds I must not attempt a sketch of Ponsonby. He is an excellent person in his place, but that place is not the budget, and in fact I'm not quite sure where it is. I like the idea of Edmund's quotation competition. If I had a book of quotations, I would certainly enter. The event of the past week is that Avice has, with mixed feelings, joined a mixed hockey club. After her first game, she came back very prettily flushed and excited, and she chattered away most merrily all the evening. But next day her manner underwent a complete change, and she became very stiff indeed. Perhaps it was the reaction. She has got such a beautiful badminton racket that I, for the first time, feel inclined to go in for it, and shall perhaps join after all, if I receive another deputation from the badminton club inviting me to do so. I am not feeling quite happy because I can't read what Burr has scratched out in his letter. About a week ago, I took Jerome, nephew of Anglis Redender of Sweet Associations, out to Rame Head with a camera. The sea was magnificent, but alas, I was more than unusually unsuccessful in the photographic line, as all my efforts and much of my gear were ruined in a moment. I had exposed most of my plates with my hand camera and had ventured to a splendid position out on the rocks, where Jerome joined me, when an abnormally gigantic wave came along. I took a desperate shot at it as it towered above me, but I only wounded it, and the next moment it was on us. Fortunately, we were in a very good place for holding on. As it was, when we next remembered anything, we found ourselves drenched to the skin and rather shaken, but still alive. As for the plates, they were all ruined, and my slides ditto. I have just been assisting Christopher and Froude to make a house in the study, which always used to appeal to me. Having built the structure for them with considerable skill, I have left them to do the furnishing. Wilfrid's second letter, dated 27th of August 1907, entertained me greatly, but I, as nearly as possible, sent on the budget without reading it, because having already read one by him in that edition, I was not expecting a second letter in the same budget, and I put it aside, thinking I had already been through it. If anyone asked me, I don't suppose anyone will, and this is apropos of nothing in particular, how he or she could lay out a sum varying between £10 and £20 to the greatest possible advantage from an entirely selfish point of view, I should say unhesitatingly, get the best possible hair mattress and pillows and bedclothes and bedstead. Since a very large portion of one's life is spent in bed, it pays to be comfortable. I am indeed comfortable at last, but, and it is a very big but, my ideal nightshirt is not yet forthcoming. Pyjamas are not in the running at all. I believe the whole secret is that my night-robe, in common with all male attire of that nature, is much too short. But it is just possible that these facts do not interest you at all. I wish this was a better letter. I would wait another day to be inspired, but I know I should not have time, and as it is my week is nearly up, and I shall have to keep this open for a few photos that I am printing. I think Enid did nobly to make such good bricks without straw. I hope she is getting strong rapidly now she is home. Your affectionate brother, Arthur. P.S. Does anyone know who R is? Also, I admire Cuthbert's and Edmund's photos hugely, but where is Aldwyn's photo with all the hair? Notes on Avice's letter. The Reverend Ponsonby with Arthur's local Church of England priest in Devonport. We don't know exactly what poor Ponsonby did to so irritate Arthur, but Arthur didn't think much of him or his sermons. Arthur is often rude about him, referring to him in the budget as the proud prelate or the prebendary. Wilfrid wanted Arthur to draw a sketch of Ponsonby for the budget, and Arthur politely declines. Anglis Redenda. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, as I never did Latin. Mr. Jerram wrote a book on this subject for the teaching of Latin to schoolboys, and the nephew, Jerram, is a Garfield House boy. This subject greatly interested the budget and initiates a lot of discussion. Rame Head is a beautiful stretch of coast, just inside Cornwall, across the River Tamar from Plymouth, which is in Devon. It was a place where Arthur clearly loved to escape to on a day off. He would walk or climb, he would draw or paint or take photographs. And on this occasion he's taken a schoolboy for a trip out, and the two are nearly washed out to sea, and Arthur ruins a lot of expensive camera equipment. Rame Head would have been a quiet spot in 1907, as few people owned a car, and the headland was in an isolated spot. A debate on nightshirts versus pyjamas, and the positives of a hair mattress, things we don't talk about anymore. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a hair mattress. The budgeteers discussed nightshirts, nighties and pyjamas a good deal in upcoming budgets. They would probably be horrified that I'm telling you. But the saddest bit in Arthur's letter is Dorothy's decision to leave the budget, which comes as a shock to many of the siblings. But it doesn't surprise me. Vera tells her off for not writing a long letter. Several of them complain about her and Edmund keeping the budget too long. Imagine marrying into a family with 10 siblings, several of whom are quite bossy, and you decide to join their letter-writing group, which is light-hearted and fun at first. But then it gets a bit more serious, and if Dorothy keeps the budget for too long, she now has to pay a 6-penny fine, and she gets told off. Plus she has tuberculosis, and her health is not great. I'm not at all surprised she dropped out. Arthur leaves a space in his letter for Avice to draw a sketch on the sad subject. Avice provides a small drawing, which I will put up on Twitter, But Avice is clearly not happy with her sketch, and in a later budget she draws a more detailed one, including general sadness and tears. But there's no cause for alarm. Dorothy continues to read the budget for the rest of her long and happy life. She just leaves the actual letter writing to her more extrovert husband. And from my point of view, Dorothy's flowing, curving handwriting was a complete nightmare to decipher. None of these letters are typed, and it is sometimes a real puzzle for me to work out what on earth they are talking about. Vera's letter. Garfield House, 2nd of November 1907. Dear family, you will be surprised to see where I am writing from, but scarcely more surprised that I am myself. Avice wrote a nice little letter asking Bernard and myself here for the week end. And to my surprise, here we are. The only drawback is that Arthur and Dorothy are away at Ponsworthy House, it being half-term. Christopher is still here with the nurse, and it is very nice to see my nephew again. He has grown so much since I last saw him that I should hardly have known him. He is a jolly-looking little chap, though rather worried about many things, with a very active conscience, and on the whole he is very obedient. November the 3rd, Sunday afternoon. Bernard has been amusing himself all afternoon with a new clockwork engine of Christopher's that runs on lines, Christopher being out for the afternoon. Now he and Avice are seated on the drawing-room floor, deep in discussion over great engineering feats. Just now, with the aid of Christopher's bricks, it is an elevated railway. What one puts up, the other takes down, and it is only my occasional words of wisdom thrown in that produces anything. There was an interval for discussion here, ending up with Avice telling me to mind my own business, advice which I must follow, or I shall get nothing written in this letter. I only wish the prebendary would walk in, as the scene before me is really quite amusing. We went to see a rugby match yesterday afternoon, Devonport Albion versus a French team. It was really very interesting, though the Albion won pretty comfortably. The French were a fine-looking lot of men, and some of them looked quite English. The game began in a roar of laughter, as in the first scrum, just as it was formed, a fat Frenchman overbalanced, and the whole scrum collapsed. One little Frenchman collared a very big Albion man rather high, with the result that the Albion man went on running with the little man pick-a-back on his shoulders. In the evening we went to the theatre, and we saw H.B. Irving in The Bells. It really was extremely good, and the play was quite tragic. It quite fascinated us. In fact, I felt very glad that I was sleeping in the same room as Avice that night, as it is such a fearful story. I can't imagine anyone being able to act a part like that 2 or 3 nights running. It must take such a tremendous lot out of a man. Last Saturday, in London, I went to a very different piece. Burr took me to the Mollusk, in which Sir Charles Wyndham is acting. There is not very much plot, and yet it is very good. There is a practically new actress in it, a Miss Inniscourt, who is extremely good. I shall be very interested to see her in something else. Hockey has begun once more, and so far we, Atalanta, are doing very well. We have played 4 matches, and we won them all easily. 9-2, 9-2, 6-1, and 11-3. We are very strong this year, and if we can keep the team together, we ought to win all of our matches. Kent and the East, however, will have a bad season, I expect, as we are losing our centre-half and our best back. Avice is now thriving, as you will see from Arthur's letter on mixed hockey. This is her description of her first day's play, written to me. One man said, "Damn!" just like that. Cuthbert, I found your camp photographs very interesting, and most of them were such good ones. You clearly had a grand time at Aldershot, although I am not sure I would have liked the long march to get there. Edmund, I have done as you said and taken out some of the photographs for the family book. They all interested me very much, though, according to your camera's indisposition, they were not so good as usual. I think your Stonehenge ones give a very good idea of the place, and the groups are very characteristic. I quite mean to enter for your quotation competition. I suppose you will give us time to do it in, i.e., you won't expect them for this budget I'm sending you now, but wait for the next one, in 7 or 8 weeks' time. Please explain this when you write. Enid, I don't think Owen and Hazel's photographs do them justice, but I should like to have them for the family book, when you get them back again, after they have been round everybody. I expect Mother will have told you by now that Father is editing the Reliquary, and I receive the nice little sum of £5 a quarter for helping him whenever wanted, doing the annoying but necessary mechanical work, etc. I feel as if I had scarcely earned it this quarter. I now pay all my hockey expenses, journeys, subscriptions, and so on. It is simply astonishing how they all mount up. But it is delightful to have money of one's own for that sort of thing, to be able to decide whether you can afford to do something, instead of thinking whether one ought to ask Mother for money, though of course I nearly always got it when I did. Avice, I did like your picture, and the description of the bicycle tour incident at Hereford. Bernard, I must endorse what you say about Captain Brassbound's conversion. Ellen Terry is simply delightful in it. Arthur, I was delighted with your collection of photographs. Most of them are so very good. I have given Avice a list of those I particularly want for the family photograph book. Please be kind and let me have them. The photograph of Alice is splendid, though a little pensive. I also like the one of myself very much. The group ones are very good, but does not Mr. Sargentson look old? The photo of the duel is splendid. You were very silly not to have found Aldwyn's beastly photograph, considering you sent the budget on to me yourself, with the photograph all crumpled up. However, as it has been round, I will leave it in here for you to see and destroy. Did you hear what Rendell, the editor of the Athenaeum, said to Father about Arthur a little time ago? Your son writes in very good style. Your reviews are clearly appreciated, Arthur. I am very sad that Dorothy is withdrawing from the budget. We shall all miss her letters, but I must say I am not surprised if it tires her, as I always feel I have done a good day's work by the time I have really read the budget, written my letter, and rearranged and done up the budget ready for dispatch. Bernard always reproaches me for not endeavouring to put down the books I have read, so I must try this time, though I have kept no list, and consequently can only recollect, on the spur of the moment, the last few I have read. Memoirs of the Life of Sir Walter Scott by Lockhart. I have been struggling with this enormous unabridged volume for the last month, and am still only halfway through as yet. Still, I am quite interested in it, although I do not think Scott led an interesting life. But the references to a well-known man's famous contemporaries are always so interesting. Your affectionate sister, Vera. Notes on Vera's letter. Vera wrote 9 book reviews, but I've just included 1, or I'd be here all day. All of these letters today include numerous book reviews. They were a very well-read lot. Ponsworthy House is on the edge of Dartmoor, and Dorothy and Arthur have gone to stay there with friends for half-term, leaving their son Christopher behind with Nurse and Avice at Garfield House. It seems unusual to us, but Nurse would have been responsible for a lot of Christopher's early upbringing, which was very usual for middle-class people then. And whilst Christopher is out for the afternoon, Avice and Bernard are sitting on the floor playing with his train set. As Vera says, sitting on the floor playing with children's toys was clearly not the done thing. Avice is playing hockey in a mixed team, and one man said "damn" just like that. Avice and Vera have probably led fairly sheltered lives so far. They may have heard little, if any, swearing, and Avice was shocked that a man would say damn in front of her. The Bells was a hugely successful play in the 1870s, and the main character was played for decades by the British actor Henry Irving, who was the first ever actor to receive a knighthood in 1895. In 1907, The Bells was being staged at a theatre in Plymouth, and Irving's son, H.B. Irving, is now in the title role. The most interesting thing about Sir Henry Irving, I think, is that Bram Stoker knew him well, as he was personal assistant to Sir Irving and also the business manager of the Lyceum Theatre, which was owned by Irving, and was then one of the most successful theatres in London. Irving was the most famous actor of his time, and it appears Bram Stoker idealised him, but was also fearful of him. Bram Stoker wrote Dracula whilst working for Henry Irving in the late 1800s, and it's widely acknowledged that Irving was the main inspiration for the character of Count Dracula. In the next episode of 100 Years of Cox, we will hear from Neville, sibling number 4, who works for the railways in South Africa. He wrote a long account of his travels through Europe on his way home, including his train journeys, his hotels, how much everything cost, what he thinks of what he sees and does, and plenty about the weather as well. He visits many cities whilst travelling south, finishing up with a tour of Pompeii, organised by the famous early travel agent Thomas Cook. It is really quite a remarkable snapshot of what Europe was like in 1907. Neville then boards his ship and travels back to Africa, remarking that he has had a really enjoyable summer holiday. 100 Years of Cox, the Machel Cox budget letters, and all content is subject to copyright and belongs to both myself and the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Machel Cox Letters is on Twitter, where I share budget photos, sketches, and interesting bits and pieces. If you have any questions, or if you've enjoyed this podcast, please write to me, machelcoxletters@gmail.com. You have been listening to 100 Years of Cox. Thank you for listening.